Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Well, hello and welcome to, or welcome back to, the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thanks for coming along and listening to this podcast, because it is a show that is designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. Hey, my name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show every week with Craig Brown, an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hello, Craig. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Tom. Looking forward to our talk with Rob today.
Yeah, every single week we try really hard to bring to this podcast interesting interviews and other ideas that are going to help all the listeners enhance and grow their careers. And today is going to be one of those days. Today we have Rob McAveney, and he is the CTO at Aras. Hey, Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Hey, Rob, why don't you give us a little bit of your background? Where did you start off? How did you get to where you are today in this role as CTO?
Sure. My background is actually mechanical engineering. Came into the software world early in my career. In fact, I've been doing software most of my life. But I decided that software applied to other engineering disciplines seemed to be where it fit best. Again, background mechanical engineering. Out of college, I went and worked in the aerospace industry at Boeing for a few years. I've got a good background there in many different enterprise systems, really the business around engineering, manufacturing, quality, configuration management. I've got a very good basis there. And then made the jump into the software industry, into a PLM vendor. That was one of the earlier PLM vendors by the name of Eigner. That was a German company that was subsequently acquired, and technology is still around, but the company is no longer there. I was there for a few years, and then I came to Aras, and I have been at Aras for 16 years now.
Wow.
So the majority of my career has actually been here, and Aras has grown quite by leaps and bounds during that time. So I've worn a lot of hats, but I've ended up in this role as CTO, dealing with the future vision for how where we're going with product and technology.
Well, Rob, it's great to chat with you again. You and I have known each other for, I think 5 years now. As a CTO, where do you see the PLM's future going? What's on your mind as a CTO? What do you are really good at? What are you really worried about?
Yeah, I think the thing to not worry about, but to plan for is really the scale of data and the scale of what's coming. We talk a lot about extended enterprise where you're dealing with supply chains and lots of suppliers and business partners. You have IP protection that you need to worry about, but the scale of data and the scale of what companies are having to deal with in terms of process is expanding at an exponential rate. You get into newer disciplines like model-based systems engineering, much more detailed simulation, multi-fidelity, multi-discipline simulation, and you're dealing with much more data and many more people, and dealing with that scale is, I think, probably going to be the biggest challenge moving forward.
Yeah, what's in your mind? What's behind this trend? Is it just because computers are cheaper, or is there something else also driving the pace of change?
I think it's the complexity of product, changing business models, changing attitudes towards compliance. There's a lot of things that are driving this, but the end result, I believe, will be that many more people will have to be involved in this process.
So one of the goals of the Digital Enterprise Society is helping out the smaller manufacturers. Some of the work done at Purdue has shown us that a lot of them don't feel they're being served by, in general, PLM vendors or PLM solution providers. You guys at Aras have a different approach, and I don't really want to get into the approach as much as I want to talk a bit about small and medium-sized manufacturing companies. Is something happening with all this digitization that's going to make it easier for them to embrace it?
I believe so. I think the free availability of PLM software is something that that they can take advantage of. I think moving forward, you're going to see more and more offerings on the cloud that are going to be accessible to small and mid-sized companies. But I think that the same thing applies to small and mid-sized companies that applies to global enterprises. Complexity is increasing. Business processes are a little bit different at your company than at other companies, and so it's not so much that the scale or the complexity of the problem is different. It's simply the scale of the company that's different. And so I think it's important that companies recognize that the complexity of products is not related to the size of the company.
Now, you said it, and I want to emphasize it a little bit. The different business models for acquiring these tools to be able to use, simulation and computer-aided design and all of the BOM management things you want to do. Both cloud and this notion of open source. Now, you and I know open source really well. We've lived it for over a couple of decades, but maybe in layman's terms, can you explain open source and how that's going to help the smaller manufacturers, if you will, their cost of startup?
Yeah, I think it's the free availability of the software. I think that's first and foremost. It isn't that every manufacturing company is intent on taking a source code and developing their own PLM. I think the goal is that the business models are such that software providers can deliver in an open source business model. And without getting in the way. So the software is freely available, and smaller companies can take advantage of that. They don't have to write their own. They don't have to have a large development organization in order to take advantage of open source. The biggest piece of open source is availability of the software.
Well, and then they need somebody to help them navigate that, right? I mean, especially if they don't have an IT department or anybody on their staff that wants to be that tool guy. What would you recommend to them if they're listening to this and saying, okay, well, I want to get started. What do I do?
Yeah, so I see both sides of the spectrum. Actually, we have a lot of our customers and open users have downloaded and used our software, for example, without any of our help and without engaging with third parties. That's certainly a possibility, but as you mentioned, it does take some skills. It does take somebody who's willing to roll up their sleeves and really attempt to understand how the software works and adapt it to their use cases. The other option would be to engage with a provider or engage with one of the software provider's partners. There's a lot of companies out there that provide guidance for how to use PLM and how to adapt it to your individual situation.
Interesting. What in these smaller companies, what's been the surprising trend of the last 18 months from your point of view?
For the smaller companies? So yeah, I think the surprising trend has been the lack of trend, right?
Okay.
There hasn't
Interesting.
been for me. For me, I haven't seen that smaller companies have been adopting newer technologies and newer methodologies at the same pace as the larger companies have been. So when I talk to smaller companies, I have not seen the level of adoption for things like systems engineering. I haven't seen smaller companies being really ready and willing to move to newer, PLM as a service or cloud technology paradigm. I haven't seen it. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means I haven't seen it yet.
Well, I was curious for your perspective. I think a lot of them too are still using drawings, even paper drawings. And for you and I, we're way past that. We're talking about 3D representations and slices through there, and we even think that we shouldn't need drawings anymore. And yet, we deal with manufacturing people all the time, including those tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers. That's all they know. And I think they're actually intimidated. They're scared when somebody says, "Oh, we're going to get rid of 2D drawings. Trust me, it's all in the model." First, it's like telling them that the new requirements are coming in a foreign language, something they don't know how to do. And then they've heard all the stories about the cost of startup and, the license fees, at least from the, if you will, the conventional software vendors tend to be higher than people can stomach. And, that's a real problem. Let's move a bit to other things happening. If you look at the newspapers, data analytics is everywhere. I think part of that's because it's becoming cheap, so it's becoming a commodity. But now you got a bunch of people that may not know how to really apply it. And then as you get a bit more into machine learning, or that's a part of artificial intelligence, you get this notion that, you'll just be presented with information you need for the next decision. So there's some notion of an order of decisions tucked away in your company. Speaking to our membership, what should they be aware of? The Digital Enterprise Society practitioners of PLM. What should they be aware of with all this new terminology coming at them? They've worried about how to design a part and check it in and check it out and put it in a BOM, and maybe there's an engineering BOM and a service BOM, but they don't, now they get told data analytics. What's it all mean?
So the thing to understand about both analytics and machine learning is that the output of such a thing is only as good as the data. It's only as good as the machine learning training. It isn't a magic bullet that's going to suddenly do all the work for you. In the short and midterm, these tools are going to be utilized for decision support, not decision making, decision support.
Interesting.
So
that's important. Because you can't be replaced, right? Because it's oftentimes in a decision-making process, there's judgment. And machine learning is not replacing judgment. I mean, it can't. It doesn't know how to do that yet.
Agreed.
Maybe someday, but maybe not in my lifetime.
So the use cases I like to talk about in this space are, think about something like impact analysis, where a machine learning algorithm might be able to, based on past engineering changes, might be able to detect that maybe this other thing might be affected by a change, and that the AI can absolutely suggest to you that this new thing might be appropriate to include on your change. But that doesn't mean that it automatically knows the answer. It's just suggesting it to a human that can actually make a real decision, at least in the short term.
Well, and so in that example, the human would be maybe encouraged to, let's have another peer review, or let's look at that a little more carefully. We in the embedded software space of control systems, we once had a term called software fatigue. And like metal fatigue, you think, you stress it, it'll eventually fail. Well, we don't really mean stressing it. What we really mean is when you got to the 100th change of a particular module, the likelihood that you lost track of what it was originally for is higher and higher. And so at some point, the software is just fragile because we've changed it so much. So that's what we meant by software fatigue. So I could see a machine learning. I could see a machine learning thing helping that. It could help you say, hey, this is like the 42nd time you've changed this 100 lines of code. Maybe you should reconsider. Maybe you should recode it. But anyways.
Refactor. But
that's a better term. Doesn't sound like rework then, right?
It's continual improvement then, right?
So I want to move to you and I were at a conference together. Actually, Thom was there with us too, at the Connex 19 a few weeks back. And you were a part of a panel. And I found the discussion interesting. There was a question from the audience about the amount of customization companies are doing. And I really like the point you made. I'll let you make it. But also follow up then, as a user of these tools, what can I as a DES member better do, be prepared to accept tools maybe the way they are, not the way they want to be. Can you comment on that? And start with your response to that question about customization versus off the shelf.
Well, I don't know that I remember exactly the words I used, but
well, you were pretty vocal. I remember that.
I think, well, the way I would start today would be there are different reasons for customization. Okay, there's not one size fits all. There's no so there are some companies that have the capacity and have the flexibility to change all their business processes and just work the way a piece of software works out of the box. That's certainly possible, and some companies are capable of doing that. Other companies, like the ones we were talking about earlier, that might have older processes that have been in business for 30 years and have some things that are core to what they do, maybe don't have the initial capacity to change both technology and process at the same time. And for those kinds of companies, I think it's okay. And I tell our customers this all the time. It's okay to implement maybe an older process, maybe a less than ideal process. It's okay to do that in a modern tool, as long as you have the intention and actually execute on changing that process over time. So instead of the initial culture shock of completely changing process and technology at the same time, sometimes it's better to make small tweaks to process while you're changing your technology, and make the bigger tweaks to your process over time. And that's where you need a platform that's capable of keeping up with those kinds of changes.
Well, and then you need an implementation plan. So yeah, the Aras platform, this is one of the advantages you guys have created with it. And it's one of the reasons big companies like General Motors are using it. But I think you hit the nail on the head. It's the willingness or the ability of the organization to adopt, in some cases, revolutionary new process.
Yeah.
I would say to our members listening, I say, well, be open to that. If you're an early adopter, why don't you just step up to management and say, I'll use it out of the box. But don't get frustrated then when you find out that the organization can't move that fast. And it can be for lots of reasons, including existing governance, existing organizational boundaries. I mean, those are very real sometimes, and they don't go away very easily. And it's rarely technology that's the issue. It has more to do with how you govern your company.
I would also caution, if I could, that just because a system has a process out of the box, that does not necessarily make it a best practice. Well, you need to assess and find the right tool, of course, but also you need to be cognizant of the fact that most of the tools that are on the market have processes or business practices that were defined by the last generation of product. Right. So
not the next generation. Yeah,
exactly. So just because it might meet your current practices, or you can adapt your current practices to meet this out of the box tool, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to meet your practices a year from now or 5 years.
Yeah, and that brings me to this point about you really got to understand your business, which is to say your key measures. At least at big companies, we've always got key measures floating around. Some other people would say, well, what makes you the leader in your market? What's your secret sauce, if you will, or your competitive advantage? From your point of view, you've dealt with a lot of different companies, I'm sure, at Aras. What does your experience tell you? Are people really able to focus on their secret sauce, or do they need other help in helping figure out what it even is?
I think the latter. A lot of companies really have trouble determining what their secret sauce really is. There is a resistance often. There's always resistance to change, but there's resistance to change in places where it really wouldn't be a big deal to change. And there's willingness to change some things that maybe you shouldn't change. And each company has to make their own assessment of that. And I think there are plenty of resources out there to help you determine, how to approach such a conundrum, how to determine what is your secret sauce, and play to that. But the goal from a software provider perspective is to enable, secret sauce for company A and secret sauce for company B are very different things. And my goal as a software provider is to be able to enable both.
And even within the same industry, I've had a debate with lots of folks in our industry where, they're like, well, each segment, so like car companies versus airplane companies, well, the segments ought to be similar. And in my experience, I found the best insight to how to help the car company get better from non-car companies. Yeah. Right? I was better off talking to an airframe manufacturer or heavy equipment or even the chemical industry to get new ideas, and then I could bring them back and debate inside the company whether that could improve our critical paths. So I think get out there and hear from other people, not just your own industry. You might be surprised what you might learn. So
Agreed. I bring that. I always go back to software, of course, Craig. You know me. But if you're bringing ideas in from other industries, it's probably not likely that your existing software provider is going to have those new ideas built into their out of the box software.
Well, that's right. Or else you got to configure till you die. But anyways,
Yep.
We won't go there. Let's talk a bit about standardization. It's one of the other hot topics, especially in the airframe manufacturers. They have some public organizations now where they're trying to improve interoperability.
Yep.
And they do that the kind of conventional way to say, okay, here's this file and I want it to be multi-CAD usable and I want it to be in multi-PDM vendors. So let's have a data format. Is that the way to go on standardization, or is there something else to do? And how much do we really need them?
Oh, that's a tough one.
I wish we were taking a picture of your face. That was really good. Anyway, listen up, everybody. This will be insightful.
Standardization is a challenge. So I would never come out and say that standardization is a bad thing. Of course, it's a good thing. The problem is by the time you standardize, the world has moved on.
Right.
So if we're really talking about interchange formats for 3D CAD and related data in this day and age, you know what? That problem should have been solved 20 years ago. Now we're talking about interchange of systems models. How long do you think it's going to take for such a standard to emerge?
Well, and I think that's part of the challenge for the standardization bodies is the way they govern and it's good because everybody gets to say and you get to vote and all this other stuff. But to your point, it takes a long time. Well, the Apples of the world, let me use them as an example. I don't think they ask for permission on how they make their interfaces to a powered cord or anything else. They just did it and they said to the world, here it is. And, oh, we're sorry. Yep, you got to buy another cable. But you know what? You'll love all the new features we have. So it's worth buying the $15 cable or whatever it is. Exactly. So my point on standardization is also the same. It is one of the innovators' dilemmas, right? There's books written about this where you could normalize that part, but the effort you would take there might be better spent on innovating a new product. And I think this is where every company struggles. If you're in an industry that's maybe an oligopoly, only a few competitors, maybe standardization makes more sense. But I can tell you in the car business, there wants to be some standards, but here in the United States, you can just listen to all the press on emission standards that's going on between the California and the president. And there's a good example about complete disagreements on what standardization we should proceed. I can tell you, working in the car business in my past, you'll want one.
Yeah.
I don't care which one, I just want one. Yeah. So it's interesting to watch on the standardization front.
So for me, I take maybe a different approach to this. Of course, as a technologist, we want to support all standards, and we want to put forth the potential for maybe not a standard that's been authored by us, but at least a solution to the problem. Right. That's our goal from an Aras perspective. Is we're pragmatists. We want to create a solution to the problem. Now, if in the future that our solution is used as input to a standard, all the better. That's great. But our goal is to introduce a solution to the actual problem, get that up and running, allow others to use that as input for a standardization body. But then subsequently, when other approaches come out, it's our job to support those future standards.
Right.
The way to do that is not by anticipating every possible data field and exchange format that's possible. The goal would be to build technology that is adaptable, that has the basics of what you would need for data interchange or some other standardization like compliance, have the basics in place, the building blocks in place, and then allow it to adapt like a Lego model to one situation or to a different situation.
Yeah, that's really good. And it's the right mental model. And so to all of you listeners out there that have participated in standardization, maybe you should look more at flexibility of governance and evolution as important as the actual standard itself, right? Because I think you're onto something there, Rob, that's probably a key to the future as all these things keep changing and the pace of change keeps increasing. Well, I've enjoyed chatting with you, and I'm going to hand it back to Thom. Thom, he's all yours.
Well, Rob, before I let you go, I wanted to take advantage of the fact that we have you on this call. A lot of the people who listen to the show are maybe earlier stage than you are in their career. And when you kind of gave your introduction, you worked for big companies, you worked for some small companies, you got involved with Aras, and you've ridden it now for 16 years up into they've become a much larger company, and you're now in that CTO role. So my question is, what advice do you have for people who might be listening who think, yeah, don't tell my boss, but I want to be CTO someday. What advice do you have? As long as we have you on the line, why don't you give us a little advice of like building a career in this whole world of PLM?
So I would have a couple pieces of advice. One is get as broad base of experience as possible. You cannot build a career on doing one thing, at least a career that resembles mine at least. You have to have some understanding of customer interaction. You have to have an understanding of software architecture. You have to have a pretty broad experience with different technologies and with different business processes. The second thing that is important, at least has been important to my career, is do not be afraid to get up in front of a crowd of people and talk. You don't have to be the expert on everything. The goal is to start a conversation. So I started very early in my career. Somebody put me on stage and said, "Speak." And I did, and while I was very nervous early in my career doing that, now it's just second nature, and it's been a boon to my career.
Well, and it always is true. The person who is asked to come and speak, whether it's inside the company or at a conference, is automatically seen as the expert. And a lot of people get terrified to go and do it. And the advice that I give people, especially those who work in technology, maybe are a little more introverted and think that getting up and speaking isn't their forte. My advice to everybody is always join a Toastmasters club. And if you don't know what a Toastmasters club is, it was founded in like 1924 because one of the biggest fears that people had in business was public speaking. Fast forward to 2019, 2020, one of the biggest fears that people have in business is public speaking. So as much as things change in our world over 100 years, some things have remained the same. And yet, if you can learn to clearly and concisely be able to share your thoughts, you get asked, to be the person who stands up and share those thoughts. And that just positions you for more promotions. I mean, long before I made my living as a professional speaker, master of ceremonies, and podcast host, I was the guy who was doing that inside the company and out, doing training, volunteering to MC events. And then people kept coming up to me and asked me, I remember very vividly, I was working at a law firm as their marketing director. One of the partners came to me and said, "Where did you get your MBA?" And I said, I don't have an MBA. And he said, "You talk like you have an MBA." And what I realized, it wasn't in anything that I'd said. It was just in the confidence in the way I carried myself. And so I think that is great advice for everybody, no matter what stage of career they are at. So I'll get off my soapbox. You brought it up.
So it's nice chatting with you, Rob. I enjoy it a lot. I look forward to our next discussion. And thanks so much for giving us your insights to the Digital Enterprise Society.
Yeah, Rob McAveney, thank you so much for coming on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Now, all of you who are listening, join us each week because we're going to have more thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org.